Although Amara was only 10 years old, she seemed like a child carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Once their home had been filled with the warmth of her father's smile, but now it was surrounded by silence and sorrow. That smile, which once echoed in every corner of the house, now gave the feeling that everything had turned dark. Since her father's death, the house had felt like a sealed box. Peace had vanished. Amara could feel more and more each day that the light in her mother's eyes was fading. That smile and joyful sounds had been replaced by deep sadness. One day, she remembered the deep breath her father took as he breathed his last. That moment, when they were left alone together with her mother, had left a void in Amara's heart. From that day on, everything had changed. The loss of her father had been a turning point for Amara. Seeing her mother's pain, she felt the torment of being unable to share it. If she could have been in her mother's place, maybe she could have helped her more. However, life was so cruel that, despite being such a small child, Amara had to think about her family's future. Her mother's illness and the treatment process had put them in a very difficult situation. Her mother was fighting cancer, and the treatment costs were rising every day. Despite her young age, Amara felt she had to think like an adult in order to survive in this world. Life had become a daily struggle for her. Carrying such a heavy responsibility with her tiny body was almost impossible. But still, every day, she had to start with a new hope. Every morning, she would start her day early. On the cold mornings when the darkness of the night still lingered, she had to help her mother before she left for work. She didn't just handle the household chores, she also went out to work in the streets. Amara's only goal was to contribute to her mother's treatment expenses and help her, even if just a little. Taking on so much responsibility at such a young age had matured Amara from the inside. Every morning she tried to make money by selling flowers, lemonade, or sometimes old items on the streets. While sometimes she would catch people's attention, most of the time no one would look at her, no one would value her. Most people would turn their heads and continue walking slowly as they passed. Dozens of faces passed by on the street, but none of them noticed her. Everyone was focused on their own problems. No one knew what a little girl like Amara was going through, trying to cover her mother's treatment costs. Amara was looking for something more than just selling flowers and lemonade. She hoped that a few words of help, a smile, might fill the huge emptiness inside her. But she had become so weary that most mornings when she stepped into the street, she went about her sales without expecting anything, because hoping, maybe someone will come this time, somehow lit a small flame in her heart. Yet that light had begun to fade over time. With each passing day, her hope dwindled a little more, and instead of thinking, maybe today will be different, she started telling herself, today will be the same as always, as she set to work. In the morning, she would slowly head out. She wore the old coat her mother had given her. The coat was worn out, slightly torn over time, but it reminded her of so many things. Its fabric had lost its fluff, but it symbolized the love and trust carried inside it. Perhaps her mother had given her this coat as a keepsake, but for Amara, it was above all a symbol of survival. Despite the cold outside, which wrapped around her body, the coat continued to carry the warmth inside her. That morning, Amara was again in the same place. The street was, as usual, full of people rushing by. Amid the loud cars, footsteps, and conversations, Amara stood alone, in her pale old coat, trying to sell her flowers and lemonade. Her eyes, as always, avoided the faces of people. She didn't look at anyone, simply watching time pass by. The hope inside her had slowly faded, yet she still waited patiently. A customer who would buy a flower could perhaps be the only joy of her day. But that morning, she felt something would be different. From the corner of her eye, a figure appeared. A huge man, so large that he could almost disappear into everything around him, was slowly walking towards Amara's stall. His determined steps and the crowd around him caught Amara's attention. Yet at the same time, in her mind, she thought, they'll just pass by, like all the others. When the man reached Amara's stall, he first placed his hands on the flowers without saying a word and began to look them over. He squinted his eyes and studied the stall for a few seconds. Amara slightly lowered her head, avoiding eye contact. No matter how much she tried, she knew very well that people like her weren't seen by others. But this man was different. As his eyes slid towards Amara's, she flinched for a moment. There was something in his gaze. His size and posture could have made Amara feel uneasy, but the man wasn't cold or harsh as she had expected. On the contrary, he was smiling. A faint smile on his face, but it looked warm and sincere. "I'll take one of these flowers," the man said, his voice loud but gentle. "Maybe you can make me smile a little more." Amara slowly lifted her eyes and looked at his face. She briefly extended the flower, but then pulled her hand back, as if hesitating. The man looked at her without pausing, his eyes soft and kind. Suddenly, Amara realized just how humane this giant man was. In his eyes, there was a desire to connect with her, but also a wish to maintain some distance. "What's your name?" the man asked, looking at Amara. Amara, stunned, paused for a moment. No one had ever asked her name. The people she saw on the street would only look at her as they passed by. They never cared. But there was genuine interest on this man's face. She slowly replied, "Amara," she said, slightly bowing her head. The man murmured her name. "Amara." A beautiful name. His smile grew even wider. Then, he took out money from his pocket, bought the flower, and noticed the uncertainty in Amara's eyes. There was something in her gaze, perhaps sadness, perhaps some kind of loneliness, but it was so deep that he could sense it immediately. "How's your day going?" he asked, his tone careful and sincere. "Are you staying here all day?" Amara paused for a moment. Instead of responding immediately, she hesitated, looking at the man's question. In fact, for the first time in a long while, she felt the urge to give a real answer to such a simple question. But then she thought about how pointless it would be. "What difference does it make?" she said to herself. However, for a moment, she realized something. The man was listening to her sincerely. This was something new for Amara. "I'm here," Amara said, then added, "I sell flowers, I sell lemonade, that's it." Slowly, almost silently, she turned her eyes to the ground. The rock leaned a little as if to sit next to Amara, his eyes still on her. "You're doing a good job," he said sincerely. "It's a hard thing, isn't it?" Amara nodded slightly. "Yes," she said. But her eyes were still filled with tears, and she couldn't find the words to tell her story. At that moment, the rock realized that Amara wasn't just a child trying to sell flowers. She wasn't just someone who wanted to sell a flower. She was a child who wanted someone to look at her, to hear her, carrying a deep emotional emptiness. The sadness in her eyes was telling him something, but at that moment, all he wanted to do was touch Amara's soul by buying a flower. Finally, the rock bought a flower and put it in his pocket. His eyes drifted back to Amara's face. "Is there anything I can help you with?" he asked, with a look that only searched for meaning. Amara shook her head slightly. "Thank you," she said, but she didn't really know what she was thanking him for. She couldn't decide if such a simple thing could really help her. The rock smiled at her once more and continued, "I'll be here again the day after tomorrow. I hope you're really successful." Amara lowered her eyes again, but that smile had sparked a small light in the darkness. Somehow those words from the giant man had given her a little bit of hope. But just a little. The rock slowly turned his back and started to walk away. But inside, he couldn't help but think about why this child was here, trying to sell flowers alone on the street. A question mark appeared in his mind. He knew that there was more to today than it appeared, but he couldn't figure out exactly what. As usual, Amara had taken her place early in the morning on the street. In her little world, she was fighting against the wind's whisper and the hurried passing of people, trying to sell her lemonade and flowers. Today was no different. The weather was cold, but this time, her spirit was also competing with the cold. The restlessness and pessimism inside her grew a little more each day. People passed by and no one looked at her. As time passed, she felt even more alone. As the hours went by, Amara remained patient. But there was a crack in her. No one will buy today either, she thought. No matter how long she waited, no one would smile at her. So with each passing minute, it grew heavier for her. Suddenly, she heard that familiar voice. That enormous man, the Rock, as always, turned the corner and saw Amara. He slowly approached and smiled. Today, he said he wanted to buy lemonade. Amara, with the same darkness in her eyes but still a piece of hope, offered him her lemonade. The Rock took a glass of lemonade with his usual warm smile. "How are you today, Amara?" he asked slowly, carefully, and with real attention. Amara paused for a moment. Her eyes somehow looked deeper, older than usual. But this time, there was something else in her eyes, something that she perhaps didn't want the Rock to see, but it was so clear that he couldn't help but notice. "I'm okay," Amara said, still slowly but as calmly as she could. "But today is a bit hard." The Rock, carefully watching the lemonade in his hands, said, "Sometimes days are hard, aren't they?" He looked at Amara slowly, with warmth in his voice. "But at the end of every day, you shouldn't forget this. Today doesn't stop you from getting anywhere. You never know what the next day might bring." Amara shook her head slightly and lowered her eyes. "Sometimes I feel like the next day won't come," she said, her voice carrying a hint of fragility. "There's so much to be done, but everything is hard. My mom is sick. I can't make enough money. I'm waiting for the day when maybe everything will be a little easier. But how long will this waiting last? No one looks at it. No one understands." The Rock noticed the sad glimmer in her eyes. The fragility in Amara's voice deeply affected his heart. Indeed, it was hard to grasp how much weight could be placed on such a small child's life. Instead of just taking money from his pocket to give to Amara, the Rock decided to go one step further. Looking into her eyes, he spoke slowly and gently. "Amara," he said, "sometimes life really gets unexpectedly hard. But I want you to know that there are people who will always love you, who will always support you. Let me tell you something. Some days will be hard, yes, but I promise you, one day will come when you'll be much stronger, much more successful than you are today. Don't forget that, okay?" Amara listened quietly, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to cope with the sorrow inside her, but the Rock's words gave her some peace. He really had said that today was hard, but one day everything could be different. For a moment, Amara saw a spark of hope. Maybe that was enough. A flower, a lemonade, and a few kind words. Everything could change. Then the Rock returned to buy a flower. His eyes, still full of curiosity, showed that he had noticed the emotional void in Amara. But this time, something had changed. Amara was no longer looking at him as just a customer. There was an awareness now. A bond had formed, but Amara was still trying to figure out what was happening. After spending time with Amara every day, the Rock became more determined to touch her life. On the 10th day, early in the morning, he saw Amara setting up her small stall. That day, the Rock took out his phone and began to take a few photos. In that moment, the mixture of Amara's smile and the disappointment in her eyes showed him something more clearly. Amara wasn't just a child trying to sell flowers. She was trying to give a better direction to life with the love and hope inside her. With these thoughts in mind, the Rock took photos of Amara and shared a post with a brief caption. "Sometimes a small smile, a flower, or just a word can change the world. I met Amara, and she reminded me of the power of hope. Let's support her together. Take a step to help Amara's fight for survival. She deserves so much more." Amara's journey, to share and support. When the post was published, it quickly started to have a huge impact on the Rock's social media account. Millions of people were moved not just by the struggles Amara was going through, but also by the desire to support her. The hashtag number AMARASJOURNEY went viral across social media. People were sharing posts about the campaign, and many immediately took action to contribute. Afterward, an advertising agency reached out to The Rock. They said the campaign needed to be managed professionally in order to reach a wider audience. The agency decided to organize large billboard advertisements in various locations around the city within a week. The power of the campaign grew so much that ads were placed in the busiest areas of the city. One billboard would be placed at the corner across from the street where Amara set up her stall every day. One morning, Amara began setting up her flowers to sell, just like she always did. The cold weather was something she was used to, but the anxiety and hopelessness inside her had deepened a little more that morning. As she was arranging the flowers on her stand, she paused for a moment and noticed a car waiting, trying to catch her attention. But the noise and activity coming from the car made her focus even more, forcing her to concentrate a little harder. When she slowly raised her head, she was confronted with her own image on a massive billboard. Amara took a step back, feeling as though her heart might stop. The billboard showed her photo along with a message of support from The Rock. The text below encouraged people to take action and help. "Help campaign for Amara. Come together for her," it read. At that moment, time seemed to stretch, lasting for what felt like an eternity. Amara, almost on the verge of tears, couldn't fully grasp what was happening. Her eyes were shining, but her heart was racing. Her hands almost began to tremble. Something was changing. Just then, The Rock turned the corner, smiling as always. His eyes noticed Amara. The little girl was staring at the billboard, on the verge of tears. The Rock walked up to Amara and gently touched her shoulder. "You saw this, right?" he said. Amara lifted her head and looked at The Rock. Tears began to fall from her eyes, but at the same time, her heart was filled with hope. "I know this is a huge thing for you," The Rock said gently. "But Amara, look, changing a person's life isn't just about being in the right place at the right time. When I touched your life, when I helped you, I saw your strength and courage. Every day here, in this street, talking with you, reminded me that there is always hope. And that's not just your story, it's everyone's story. Everyone has something they can contribute." Amara, still a little in shock, felt these words echo deeply in her heart. Her eyes were shining, and with each passing second she smiled a little more. But this is such a big thing. I was just selling flowers." The Rock slowly shook his head. "No, Amara. You are so much more than that. And this story will grow with every step you take. People are here to support you. Today can be different from tomorrow. The only thing you need to remember is that for you, everything is possible." Amara took a deep breath and tried to wipe away the tears from her eyes. They stayed silent for a moment, but then Amara spoke. "Thank you," she said. "Really, thank you." The Rock smiled and hugged her. "I want you to always remember this. You are a very valuable person. Don't lose hope. I'm here. I'll always be by your side." From that moment on, Amara's life would never be the same. After that day, everyone who passed by her on the street smiled at her, and with each passing day, more people bought flowers from her. Many people helped to support her. The fundraising campaign, spread through social media, grew rapidly, and with the help of the billboards in the city, it reached even more people. That day, Amara was no longer just a child. She had become a hero, offering hope by sharing her story. With The Rock's support and the growing scale of the campaign, she had far surpassed her struggle for survival. Her journey ahead would no longer just be about selling flowers and making lemonade. It would be a step towards a future full of hope. Amara slowly realized that she was experiencing a transformation at a turning point in her life. As the campaign grew on social media and the billboards around the city, her life was rapidly taking shape. Every day, more people smiled at her on the street. "Good morning, Amara." These people became the most precious moments of her days on that street. People had started to understand the struggles she faced and the fight she had been putting up, and they were doing everything they could to support her every step of the way. One morning, the Rock saw Amara on the street again and approached her with a big surprise. There was a sense that today would be even more different than usual. The Rock walked up to her with a smile and gently touched her shoulder. "Amara, I've done something for you," he said. "I've seen how your story has resonated in people's hearts, but beyond that, I want to do something that will change your life and your mother's life." Amara looked up at him, astonished. "Well, what did you do? What do you mean?" The Rock, speaking reassuringly, said, "I found a job for your mother. You won't have to worry about money anymore. You'll get through these difficulties together." Amara, with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, asked, "Really?" She could hardly believe it. "But my mom, she's still trying to get better. How will she work?" "I found a job that fits her," the Rock continued. "She will get help, and you won't have to worry about her treatment costs anymore. I will do everything I can to help her regain her health." In that moment, a part of the immense burden that had been weighing on Amara's heart for so long began to lighten. This wasn't just about her mother's treatment costs no longer being a concern, but also about the fears in Amara's life gradually starting to disappear. A week later, Amara's mother had started her treatment and was improving. With the Rock's support, she had found a job and their financial troubles were over. Amara no longer had to sell flowers and make lemonade on the street every day, because one morning her mother made a big surprise by enrolling Amara in school. That morning, Amara, in her school uniform, ran excitedly to her mother's side. Her mother looked at her with a warm smile and said, "Today is a very special day for you. You're going to school now." Amara had always imagined starting school with fear in her heart, but today she felt very different. Her mother's recovery had created a great opportunity for her to make a fresh start in school. For Amara, this wasn't just a school day. It was the realization of a dream. School now symbolized freedom and hope for her. As Amara put her school bag on her back that morning, the Rock sent her one last message. "Remember, Amara," he said, "everything has a beginning, and you deserve the best. There are many wonderful things waiting for you on this new journey you've started." Amara, with gratitude in her eyes, replied, "Thank you. You've always been there for me, really. Everything has changed. Everything." Her first day at school was magical for Amara. She made new friends, chatted with her teachers, and met people at school who smiled at her and supported her. Everyone's perception of her had completely changed. She was no longer alone. And perhaps the best part was knowing that each time she went to school, her mother was getting better and working a good job, which allowed her to focus on her lessons with peace of mind. The Rock and the people around him had not only provided physical support, but also emotional support. With each passing day, Amara took steps forward, gaining more confidence in her life. She was no longer focused on selling flowers alone on the street. Now she was focused on going to school, growing, and seeing the world with a new perspective. One day, the Rock came to visit Amara and her mother at their home. Her mother had recovered quickly during her treatment and had started her new job. Amara's school success was also progressing rapidly. Everything was moving forward in a way much more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Every evening, while Amara had dinner with her mother, she looked to the future with great hope. When the Rock arrived at their home, Amara's mother was in the kitchen preparing a meal, chatting and smiling with the Rock. In that moment, he felt as though this family had been reborn. Despite all the hardships, they were reminded that with love and support, anything could be overcome. "You did it," said the Rock. "You two are very strong people. Amara, your future is very bright. I'm here now to support you." Amara looked at the Rock with love in her eyes and smiled. "You never left me alone," she said. "I'm living the best time of my life. It's not just about selling flowers anymore. I have a new place in life." Her mother smiled and said, "Our life has completely changed. Everything is thanks to you. Thank you, the rock. You did everything for Amara's life." With a heartfelt smile, the rock said, "This is just the beginning. From now on, everything will be even better." And that day, everything in Amara and her mother's life embarked on a new journey. Both of them, looking to the future with hope, were building a new life together. This wasn't just about selling flowers or lemonade. It was the story of a life transformed by love, courage, and solidarity. Amara would continue to succeed in school, her mother would be happy in her job, and together they would build an even better life with each passing day. With their love and support for each other, each new day would help Amara take another step toward a brighter future. And one day, while that little girl sold flowers and lemonade, the world around her would remind her of how strong she was and how life was always full of hope. Thus, the dark days in Amara and her mother's life were illuminated with love and support. And with each new day they opened the doors to a hopeful future, stepping together onto a brighter path. Amara was no longer just a street child, but a girl who believed in life and her dreams. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Wishing everyone the chance to discover the power and hope within themselves. We'll see you in new stories.